Hello everyone and a warm welcome to our channel. I hope you are doing well. Studies and preparations are going on. In this particular revision video, we are going to talk about chapter number 3, that is the part of the series of the directors chapter, appointment and remuneration of managerial personnel. So one video is already available on the channel itself, but that is completely in Hindi and English, and this one would be in complete English language for all our dear students and subscribers from South. Right? So before starting with the concepts and the chapter, two important points to be noted upon. First, these notes are available for purchase at extremely nominal cost. So the entire notes, company law notes, economic law notes, and the question bank is available. You can register on the Razorpay page that is available on the description of this video. Secondly, we have our own Telegram channel on which MCQs are being run. So company law has already been covered from tomorrow. So tomorrow means given the time frame, approximately by 4th to 5th October, we will be starting with our economic law. So company law has been covered and economic law MCQs will be starting. So ensure you are joining that channel and you are solving the MCQs on a day-to-day basis. At the end of our MCQs, I will also be posting some very important points to be taken care of with respect to the entire corporate and economic laws, right? So the introduction and basic points are clear. Let's start. By the way, chapter number 1, appointment and qualification of director, is also available in complete English, so ensure that you are watching that as well. Okay, now let's start. Appointment and remuneration of managerial personnel. So what do you mean by managerial person? Three types of persons, or we can say offices, are covered under this term: managing director, whole-time director, and manager. So now, before understanding their provisions, let's try to analyze what these definitions mean. Starting with manager, section 2, clause 53. This is not a subsection, this is a clause. Okay, manager means an individual. So please note that manager means an individual. He doesn't need to be a director. So manager means an individual who's subject to superintendent's control and direction of the board of directors. So he is working under the board, has the management of the whole or substantially the whole of the affairs of the company. So he is handling the affairs of the whole or substantially the whole. So now there may be a doubt that, sir, what is the meaning of substantially the whole? So that term substantially the whole is not defined separately under the act. So we have to apply our common sense and logical interpretation. So let's say a person is having 85, 90, 95% control of the company. We can reasonably assume and conclude that that person is a manager as per section 2 clause 53. Now what is the position that he's holding? He is having the control of the affairs of the company, and it includes a director or any other person occupying the position of manager by whatever name called. So this definition has been made as inclusive one. So we are not focused much on what we are calling him. We are not focused much on what we are calling him. Our main focus, primary focus, is what functions he is performing. So this is a inclusive definition, not an exhaustive. Whether under a contract of service or not, it is possible that that person is not on our payroll. Still, he is a manager as per section 2 of the Companies Act. Coming to next, managing director, section 2 clause 54. Managing director comprises of two terms: managing director. So obviously that person is a director first. So please see the start. MD means a director, not an individual, means a director. But what compliances and what conditions should be checked to ensure that we attach the word managing in front of him? Let's see. Managing director means a director who, by virtue of the articles of a company or agreement with the company or a resolution by members, that is general meeting or the board of directors. So this is the source of power. And what is the power? Entrusted with the substantial powers of management of the company. And just like above, this is also an inclusive definition. It includes a director occupying the position of MD, whatever name called. So again, naming is not important. If he is occupying the position of MD, if he has the substantial powers of the management of the company, he is a MD as per Companies Act 2013. I hope this point is absolutely clear. Now, you may have a query, sir, again, here, what is the meaning of substantial powers of management? So Act does not clarify what is substantial powers of management, but there is one explanation which says what is not a substantial powers of management. So signing on checks, signing on checks or any negotiable instruments, these are administrative acts. So you can just have a brief read of this, that signing and endorsing a negotiable instrument, signing on share certificate, direct registration of any share, these are administrative acts that every director does. So that is not substantial power. Then what is substantial power? That is not defined. We have to apply our common sense given the facts of the question. Okay, next, whole-time director includes a director in the whole-time employment of the company. Point to be noted, above two definitions were starting with mean, that means exhaustive. This is inclusive. includes a director in the whole time employment of the company. So whole time director means director who is a whole time employee of the company. That is very simple. Now coming to next, MD or whole time director should be a director first. Obviously, as the name suggests, they are a director first. You may have a query ki sir, we studied different types of directors in chapter number 1. One was not additional director, one was rotational director, non-rotational director. So which type of director is being covered here? Sir, any type of director is covered. We don't care. We are only and only concerned with whether that person is a director or not. Clear hai? Chalo, let's start next. They can be any type of director. This I have clear. Two directors can have substantial powers of management. So this may come up as a query that sir, in one company is it possible to have two directors who have substantial powers of management? Answer is yes. So in one company, two managing directors are possible. Point to be noted, sir, in one company MD and manager is not possible. That is given in section 196. We will cover in next couple of minutes. A person who is not an employee but he is appointed as a director is not a whole-time director of the company. Why? Because he is not an employee. So a person who is not an employee, how can be in the whole-time employment? So that is pretty much obvious. Next, a company may have two whole-time director but a person cannot act as whole-time director in more than one company at the same time. Sir, is it possible that I work on whole-time basis in more than one company? Answer is no. That is not possible. That is very obvious. Next, if in a company there is Mr. Sham, example, and he is working as finance manager or production manager, is he a manager as per section 2 clause 53? Answer is no, because he is not handling the affairs of the company. He is handling only and only one department of the company. So finance manager, production manager, HR manager are not manager as per section 2 clause 53. Sir, can you give us a real life example of who the manager is? Have you heard the post GM, general manager? He is a general manager, so he is a manager as per section 2 clause 53. But specific domain manager is not a manager. Now let's start with the official and formal sections. Section number 196, appointment of MD whole-time manager. Collectively we will call them managerial person. Let's start. Subsection 1. There is a prohibition which I have already told you about. No company, so private, public, everyone, no company shall appoint or employ at the same time a MD and a manager. So point to be focused upon is this prohibition is with respect to at the same time. So at the same time we cannot have a MD and manager. Why? Because there will be a lot of conflict of duties, because both have similar functions of whole or substantially whole. In MD we didn't study this, so substantially the whole, but in short both the positions are covering the affairs of the company on entirety, right? So this may lead to a lot of conflict between an MD and manager. So that's why 196(1) prohibits it completely. Next, maximum term of a managerial person, and this subsection is not applicable on a government company provided section 90 to 137 are complied. So no company shall appoint or reappoint any person as its managerial person exceeding 5 years at one time. At a time, or you can say at one time. So please note that the Companies Act is not saying that the total tenure is 5 years. No, they are asking you to keep the tenure restricted with respect to one appointment at a particular time. So is it possible that I appoint someone for 5 years, then I reappoint for 5 years, then I reappoint for 5 years? Answer is yes. But at any one time you cannot appoint for more than 5 years. The total consecutive tenures can be anything. With respect to that, the Companies Act is not restricting any such tenure. I hope this is clear. Next question. When can reappointment be made? Reappointment can be made in the last year of that particular person's tenure. So if there is one MD who is appointed for 4 years, then if the company wishes to reappoint him, then that reappointment can happen in the 4th year, not the first 3 years. I hope this is clear. Disqualification, section 196(3). Before that, I have one small question that I need you to answer. So you have to pause the video and you have to comment it. I will go through the comments later on. That do you think the managing director and whole-time director need to comply with section 164 also? Answer is yes. Answer is yes. Why? Because they are directors first and then we attach the characteristic of managing or whole time, right? So section 164 also need to be complied, but apart from that, here we are talking only and only with respect to 3 posts: MD, whole time director, manager. So these conditions that I'm going to talk about, clause number A, B, C and D, need to be complied with respect to every managerial person. So if someone asks you, sir, what is the qualification criteria for a managing director? You have to state 164 also. In real life I'm talking about it, not in exam. They're not going to ask this in exam. So in real life, you have to check section 164 as well and 196(3) as well. So let's start. No company shall appoint or continue the employment. Continue means if the person is appointed and later on these clauses get hit. Next, appoint or continue the employment of any person as MD, whole-time director or manager who is below the age of 21 or has attained the age of 70 years. So if a person has not completed 21 or he has completed 70. So both are different. We want that person to be minimum 21 years old, but we want that person should be below the age of 70. But this can be met. This can be, we can say that there is one escape provision in this. Now, out of the two ages that have been given by the law under clause number A, that is 21 and 70, which particular age do you think is suitable that we should allow it? Sir, 70. Why? Because that person is very experienced. So there comes our first proviso that if someone has attained the age of 70 years, see, first they prohibited. First they said that no person will be of, if of this age, will be appointed as a managerial person. But if the person has attained the age of 70 years, then still appointment can be made provided two conditions are complied. First is your special resolution, and second, you have to give justification as to why such person's appointment is important for the company. So special resolution and justification, two conditions need to be complied with. So obviously in real life the company will state that this person has a lot of experience. A 70 years person will obviously have 25, 30, 35 plus years of experience, and that would be beneficial for the company. Now, if we are not able to meet with the special resolution criteria, then also second proviso comes in as a rescue provision and says that even if you manage to get majority votes, that is special resolution would require 75% majority. If that is not attained but still 51 majority is there, so the votes cast in favor exceed the votes cast against, if any, then also we will allow it. We will allow such person who has attained the age of 70 years to be appointed as a managerial person. But again, a second condition will come in apart from the majority votes, that is you have to take the approval of the central government. You have to prove to the central government that such appointment, which appointment of a person who has attained the age of 70 years, such appointment is most beneficial for the company, right? So you can read second proviso as well. So these two provisos can help us to appoint a person who has attained the age of 70 years. B, C, D. B is an undischarged insolvent or has at any time been adjudged as an insolvent. So currently he is an undischarged insolvent, or in the past he was adjudged as insolvent. So this is kind of a lifetime disqualification if the person is adjudged as an insolvent at any time. There is no cooling off period. Clear? C, has at any time suspended payment to the creditor or makes or has any time made a composition with them. In simple terms, there was one time where he could not repay the creditors the full amount that he owed them. So suspension or composition means kind of a compromise. If it is entered, that means that person was not even able to pay his creditors. Then do we want such person to be handling such important matters of the company in the capacity of a managerial person? Answer is no. Next, has at any time been convicted by a court. The conviction can be in India or outside India of an offense and sentenced for a period of more than 6 months. So point to be noted, up to 6 months there is no problem, no disqualification. So these four clauses need to be taken care of. Next, 196 subsection 4, approvals for terms and conditions of appointment and remuneration. So it is possible that you require 2 approvals, or it is possible that you require 3 approvals. That will depend on one of the factors that I will explain. So subject to the provisions of 197 and schedule 5, that is the basic remuneration limits, first you require the approval of the board of directors, and such approval shall be given at the meeting, not by circulation, post which the members will approve this kind of an appointment, and that kind of approval shall also be at the general meeting by way of ordinary resolution, not a special resolution. So board and member in every case have to approve the appointment as a managerial person. Now comes the question that, sir, is CG approval always required? No, it is not always required. It depends. I'm going to talk about schedule number 5 part number 1, 4 conditions. Schedule number 5 part number 1, 4 conditions. If all these 4 conditions are complied, you don't require a CG approval. But even if one condition is not complied, you have to have CG approval. I hope this is clear. So board of directors and members will always approve it. CG approval required or not depends on whether schedule 5 part number 1, 4 conditions are complied or not. Clear? Now, please note that this subsection 4 and subsection 5, which is linked to subsection 4, these are not applicable to a private company and government company, provided 92 and 137 are complied. 2 points to be noted. Disclosure. The notice which convening the board or general meeting, please note that agenda of a board meeting is not required except in 3 cases. One of the cases is section 196. Apart from that, in the general meeting notice also, explanatory statement, you have to provide all the details of who is the person who is being appointed, what is the qualification, what is the remuneration, what are the terms and conditions. So every kind of disclosure needs to be given to the board of directors as well as the members with respect to these meetings that are going to take place. Clear? Next, as soon as you appoint any person as a managerial person, you need to file a form intimating the ROC, and you will state, hey ROC, in our company we are appointing a managerial person. The form to be filed is MR1 and the due date is 60 days from the date of appointment, not from the end of the month, 60 days from the date of appointment. I hope this is clear. This is form number MR1. And in case you require CG approval, sir, why are you saying in case? Because it depends on whether, state it with me, say it with me, schedule number 5, part number 1, 4 conditions are complied or not. So in case CG approval is required, you need to file form MR2 within 90 days of appointment. Within 90 days of appointment. Now, I know most of you have a query with respect to this. Ki, sir, what if board of directors approve someone on let's say 1st August 23 and the meeting of members was held on 6th August 23 in which the members said no to the appointment. They said, please cancel this appointment. We don't want him to be a managerial person. Now, between 1st to 6th, these 4-5 days that the person has functioned as a managerial person, are those acts valid? You might be having this query and you should be having this query. So answer is yes, the acts are valid, and I am not saying this. Subsection 5, section 196 is stating this, that acts conducted will be valid. Now, added question, it is possible that instead of members, let's say board of directors approve, members approve the appointment, but CG approval, in which it obviously at first place it was required and in which CG said no to the appointment. So will the acts conducted from the date of appointment till the CG's disapproval, are those acts valid? Answer is yes, it is valid, but that we are forming that kind of a conclusion on the basis of reasonable interpretation, because 196(5) does not state anything with respect to no approval from CG. But a question was asked by ICI in which ICI has also concluded that yes, the acts intervening the period of which when the board of directors appointed that person as a managerial person until the date the CG said no, those acts will be valid as a reasonable interpretation as an extension to section 196 subsection 5. Because in 196 subsection 5, only and only with respect to members it has been covered. I hope this is clear. Now, coming to schedule number 5, part number 1, all the conditions to be fulfilled for appointment of a managerial person without the approval of CG. So, I am going to talk about 4 clauses A, B, C and E. Sir, not D. No, D has been omitted. So, A, B, C and E. All the 4 clauses, if complied, you don't need any CG approval. But if even of the clauses is contravened, or maybe we can say it is not fulfilled, you need to take the CG approval by filing form MR2 within 90 days. Am I clear? Okay. Clause number A. He had not been sentenced to imprisonment for any period or fine exceeding 1,000. Please understand, even if he is put in jail for even if 1 day, the clause won't be fulfilled. It will be contravened, right? Or fine exceeding 1,000. So up to 1,000 fine is okay. And again, point to be noted, I am focusing on fine, not penalty. So do we need to focus on such keywords also? Answer is yes. And in class also we've put in focus on these kind of words. Okay. One question, you may have a query that, sir, what if an offense is compounded and we pay the compounding fee? Would that still amount to fine? Answer is no. Answer is no. And sir, which acts are covered with respect to this imprisonment and fine? All the Indian acts are covered, like GST, income tax, everything. You don't need to learn the list as such. You will get a fair idea whether this is covered under clause number A or not. B, he had not been detained for any period under COFE POSA. COFE POSA means Conservation of Foreign Exchange and Prevention of Smuggling Activities Act 1974. So again, even if 1 day imprisonment happens, this will be contravened, right? So the word is detention, means kind of jail only. So if you have been detained even if for 1 day, this clause will get hit. Okay. With respect to A and B, there may be a query that is clarified by this particular point, that suppose a person was detained for, let's say, 1 month with respect to any of the acts under clause number A. Clause A and B, the provision is same. I am taking an example of clause number A. After that, he took the CG approval for being appointed as a managerial person. If after that again he is being appointed as a managerial person in some other company, does he or she need an approval again? Answer is no, provided the person is not again hit by clause number A and B. So in short, you don't require the CG approval again and again before every appointment, provided in that period you are not getting again hit by clause number A and B. I hope this is clear. So once an approval is given, it will hold good, provided clause A and B doesn't apply again. C, completed the age of 21 years and has not attained the age of 70. This is same as above in 196(3), and no CG approval if the age is 70 years but SR was passed in the general meeting. So in the above case, in the first proviso that we studied, if here the special resolution was passed, then schedule number 5, part number 1, clause number C is also fulfilled. Right? But if you are going for this kind of a resolution, that is OR, and this kind of a compliance where you are asking CG, in that case you will require a CG approval, and that you are taking here itself. I hope this is clear. Next, so this is kind of a same point. And age, please don't commit a silly mistake with respect to age. The person should not be below 21, so he should be minimum 21 and he should be max to max less than 70. So attaining the age of 70 is a problem. Clear? Okay. He is a resident of India. He is a resident of India, and this particular clause number E is not applicable with respect to SEZs, that is special economic zones. On this particular clause, there was one question which we covered in the 100 questions video. I hope you have seen that. If not, please, it is extremely beneficial for you. Around 9500 questions are covered in just a matter of 2.5 hours. Ensure you are watching that. Okay. Now, here you may have a query, sir, what is the meaning of resident in India? See, you and me are residents. We are studying here. We are, working here. We are born and brought up in India. But what with respect to the persons who are coming outside India? So here the definition clarifies that it includes a person who has come to India, and two conditions to be checked. First, what is the purpose of coming? So purpose of coming should be some business, vocation or employment. And second, from the date of appointment, you have to see preceding 12 months. For that 12 months, he was staying in India or not. So if he was staying in India for 12 months preceding the date of appointment, what date of appointment? Appointment as a managerial person. And second, his purpose was business, vocation or employment in India, and that is the reason he came to India. If he came as a tourist, then no, here he won't be covered. Right? So this is just a clarification that it includes a person, and this person being talked about is someone who is residing outside India. So someone named Albert, Pinto, they will try to give you some kind of hint. Right? Okay. Now, coming to next, part number 2. So there are various parts in schedule number 5. Okay, before moving to part number 2, there was one small point I wanted to clarify, that with respect to disqualification and certain clauses, we talked about two particular provisions, namely being section number 196(3) and schedule number 5, part number 1. Yes or no? Yes, sir. Now, in both these cases, we studied 4 clauses. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, point to be noted upon, and one of the most important mistake areas of students in exam is that, please understand that if 196(3) is not complied, if there is some issue in complying section 196(3), the person is disqualified. The person is disqualified, and here no CG approval can be taken. So CG approval, even the CG approval won't work if 196(3) is not complied. But in schedule number 5, part number 1, if any clause is not complied, you can take CG approval. So in exam, you have to carefully assess whether the clause being talked about is schedule 5, part number 1 or 196(3). If 196(3), the appointment is not possible. Sometimes students state that we can go for CG approval. No, in 196(3), it cannot be done. It can be done in schedule number 5, part number 1. I hope this is clear. Let's move on. Part number 2, remuneration. So what is the meaning of remuneration? Remuneration means whatever money, whatever payment you are doing to that person, and it includes the perquisites as per Income Tax Act 1961. Now coming to the point that how much remuneration can be paid. So with respect to remuneration, there are 3 cases possible. One is the case that company has adequate profits. Second is the case that company has inadequate profit, means whatever we wanted to pay to as a remuneration, we don't have that much profit. We have profit, but those are inadequate. And third is it is a loss situation. So with respect to first, that is company has adequate profit, means whatever remuneration we wanted to pay, we can pay. The matter is handed over to section number 197 that we will study in due course, means after 20 to 25 minutes. And if the company has inadequate profits or it is a loss situation, then here we are going to talk about section number 2. I'm not talking about part now. In part number 2, we are talking about section number 2. So if no profits means loss situation or inadequate profit, then the company may pay remuneration to the managerial person or other director not exceeding the limits below, that we will talk about item number A and item number B. Second point to be focused upon is that even in the loss situation or inadequate profit situation, you can pay to the managerial person as well and other director as well. What do you mean by other director? Other director means someone, for example, a non-executive director or an independent director, right? So this was not, I would not say this was a recent amendment because this happened around 2.5 to 3 years back. But yes, the limits are different. Now, already you must be having a pretty good idea about item number A. This is a simple table that you need to learn. These limits are with respect to managerial person and these limits are with respect to other director, for example, independent director. If you try to look upon this, this is basically divided by 5. Okay, but I think in this one it won't work. I'm just giving you a trick to learn. Now, 2 points that you need to focus upon while you learn the table. These limits, whatever 60, 84, 120 and 120 plus 0.01%, in case the effective capital is more than 250 CR, 2 points to be focused upon. Point number 1, these limits are maximum yearly remuneration, so for the 12 months period. And second, this is for one managerial person. So if there are two managerial director, then for one you can pay maximum 60, for another you can pay maximum 60. So this is not the total to the managerial person, but rather individual yearly remit, right? And please note that here it is less than 5 CR. So if it touches 5 CR, you come to next point, next level. Similarly, if you touch 100, you come to the next slab. So don't commit silly mistakes, because this is something that you need to learn. There is nothing with respect to what I need to stress upon except these 2 points that I have already done. So please learn the table properly. I don't want you to commit silly mistakes with respect to these points here. Now, what if a company wants to exceed the limits? Let's say the limit was coming out to be 84 lakh depending upon effective capital. Sir, what is effective capital? I will explain in around next 8 to 10 minutes. So if a company wants to exceed the limit, is it possible? Answer is yes, it would have to go for a special resolution. Point number 2, if in the question they state that the person was appointed on 1st October 23, so 23-24, what is the effective period of his duration? So the tenure was 6 months only. So don't forget to prorata these limits. So let's say the 60 was limit. In that case, you would do 16 to 1 by 2, that is 30 lakhs. Again, I'm stressing upon this. This is maximum yearly remuneration. If the tenure is less than 1 year, you have to prorata the limits. This is again one of the mistake areas that students commit in exam. I hope this is clear. Next, item number B. In case of a managerial person or other director who is functioning in professional capacity. Now earlier there used to be this thing, because I know a lot of queries come in with respect to this point, that in item number B, earlier there was no limit if a person is functioning in the professional capacity, right? But now the limits are same. Here also remuneration to be given is as per item number A only, means these limits are going to apply. So there is practically no difference, but for theoretical point of view, exam point of view, you still need to learn item number B related issues. Okay, so item number B, remuneration is nothing different. Remuneration is same as we studied in item number A, but additionally you have to comply with these 3 conditions. Sir, earlier there was no limit with respect to payment, that's why the act required these 3 conditions to be complied. But now there is no special limit with respect to remuneration. Again, item number A, remuneration is going to apply. So practically no one complies with these conditions, but from exam point of view we need to understand. So what are the 3 conditions? Number 1, that person, who is that person? Managerial person or other director, possesses graduate level qualification with expertise and specialized knowledge in the field in which the company operates. This is pretty simple. He's a graduate and has the relevant knowledge. Not having any direct or indirect interest or related to the directors or promoters at any time during 2 years preceding the appointment, on appointment and after appointment. But which directors, which promoters, which interest are we talking about with respect to the company, its holding company or its subsidiary company, right? So zero interest allowed. And third, see, zero interest, why it is allowed? Because we are talking about working in professional capacity. And next, he is not having any interest, means share capital, in the capital either directly or indirectly or through any other statutory structure. Again, which company statutory structures? Company, holding or subsidiary. But there is one exemption with respect to this point. If the person is holding up to 0.5% share capital, I'm saying up to 0.5% share capital in the company, not holding, not subsidiary, it is allowed, provided this was as a part of ESOP. So if this is the case, then this particular, it won't be considered as an interest and this condition will be complied with, right? But you have to focus on 0.5% in the company and ESOP. I hope this is clear. Coming to next. Now, this was item number B. Now I'm going to talk about 4 conditions that need to be complied for payment of remuneration as per item number A and item number B. So whenever you state item number A, most of the questions are going to focus on item number A and these table. Even if they ask the professional capacities, again, table, this is going to apply. So whatever you apply, 4 conditions you always need to state in the answer, and if you have solved the questions of managerial remuneration properly, you must have noticed that these 4 conditions are always given as a part of IC answer. So please pay attention. 4 subclauses, 1, 2, 3, 4. Number 1, payment should be approved by board resolution as well as NRC if 178 is applicable. So if 178 is not applicable, only board resolution is okay. But if 178 applies, board resolution plus nomination remuneration committee's approval is required. I hope this is clear. Second, there should not be any default in dues of 4 types of kind of, we can say, 4 types of people or 4 types of person. Learn this list properly. We are going to use it in 3 more instances after this. First, any bank, any PFI, non-convertible debenture holder, and any other secured creditor. Point to be focused upon non-convertible debenture holder, and second point to be focused upon secured creditor. We are not talking about unsecured. So with respect to these 4 people, there should not be any default. So these 4 are very important types of creditors, and if the company is in the loss or inadequate profits and there is a default with respect to such important people, why are you paying to the managerial person and other directors, right? But sir, is it possible to still pay our managerial person? Answer is yes. You have to take approval of, whichever the default has happened. So if there is any default with respect to a bank, you have to take their approval. You have to take their prior approval before you obtain the approval in the general meeting. So board of director appoints, their approval is given. Post that, you have to take their approval. If they approve, then you go for general meeting approval. Otherwise, the matter will be finished. You cannot pay anything to the managerial person or other director. C, that is our third. OR or SR, as the case may be, has been passed for payment of remuneration as per item number A. Why have they said OR or SR, as the case may be? If the limits are to be exceeded, SR is passed. Otherwise, OR is okay. And with respect to item number B, that is professional capacity, they are asking you to pass a special resolution. See, this does not make sense practically. First of all, you are asking them to comply with these conditions as an additional measure. Apart from that, now you are saying you require a special resolution. OR is not okay, right? And after complying so many conditions and after going through so many compliances, still you are not giving any remuneration, we can say any advantage with respect to remuneration, because the limits are same as per item number A. So practically this does not make sense whatsoever, right? And whatever the resolution you are passing has the validity of 3 years, Post 3 years, you will have to get a new resolution passed. And fourth is a general point with respect to disclosures of that particular person. You have to disclose each and every information as to general information, appointee information, disclosures in board report, everything. Now, coming to next section number 3. So we are done with section number 1. What was section number 1 in part number 2? That if the company has adequate profit, the matter is handed over to section 197. What was section number 2 with respect to part number 2? It was with respect to no profits or inadequate profits, in which we talked about item number A or item number B. Whatever you write in exam, these 4 conditions should form a part of your answer, otherwise your marks will be deducted. So with respect to section number 3, part number 3, we are going to talk about 3 special circumstances in which the item number A limits, the table that we studied, the limits can be exceeded and you don't require any kind of special resolution or any kind of special approval, right? So only 3 special circumstances are covered. Let's see the first special circumstance. Excess of the limits provided in section 1 or 2 is paid by any other company. So we accept that there is some excess payment being done, but that excess part we are not paying it, some other company is paying it. And which is that other company? 2 cases possible. First, either it is a foreign company, or second, it is a company which has got its shareholder approval for absorbing this part of excess cost, right? And that company treats this excess part as a part of its managerial remuneration for 197, and its total managerial remuneration including the excess amount is well within the limits of section 197. So basically it is complying with section 197. So the Companies Act doesn't have any problem if the excess part is being met by some other company, right? I hope this is clear. So that other company is possible that it is a foreign company or some other company which is not a foreign company, but its shareholders have approved that okay, we will absorb this excess cost. This is not and, this is or. Point number 2, that is case number 2, special circumstance number 2, where the company is newly incorporated, it can pay excess limits in excess of the limit provided only up till the 7 years from incorporation. So please understand the logic behind this kind of a provision. If a new company is incorporated, then obviously a new company requires and it wants to attract the best talent in the world for the management positions, and these people are not going to be very cheap. They are going to demand high salaries and remuneration. That's why here up to 7 years from incorporation, the Companies Act says that I know in the initial years the company is going to make loss, but still you can pay excess amount. You don't need any special approval, and this is one of the special circumstances, right? Second, if it is a sick company, but the revival or rehabilitation scheme is ordered by BIFR, that stands for Board for Industrial and Financial Reconstruction, and this excess payment is allowed for 5 years from the date of scheme or revival. So this has been approved by BIFR, so Companies Act says that okay, we are not going to step into it, this is a special circumstance. Or resolution plan is approved by NCLT for 5 years from the date of such approval. Again, this resolution plan is undertaken under IBC and it is approved by NCLT. So obviously NCLT has seen that what amount is being paid. If NCLT thinks it's okay, no problem. But excess payment is allowed for 5 years only. So new company 7 years, but in these 2 cases 5 years. And third, Remuneration is fixed by BIFR or NCLT. So these are again statutory bodies. These are corporate, like, you know, they must have seen everything before approving this. So again, the matter is handed over to them. It's okay if they have fixed it. This is a special circumstance. Now, conditions to be complied for payment of excess remuneration under above three special circumstances. Now you may be getting confused, sir. How many conditions are you stating? Please understand, these conditions we stated, these three conditions are only and only with respect to item number B, professional capacity. Most of the time this is not tested in the exam. These four conditions you have to write always, regardless of whether you are talking about item number A or item number B. These are always required to be stated in exam. And if we are talking about these three special circumstances, then you have to comply these three conditions. These three conditions are only when you talk about special circumstances. Let's talk about the additional three conditions. So please, point to be noted. So these three conditions are only and only with respect to these three special circumstances, right? So apart from the section 2 conditions that we studied above, three additional conditions we are asking you to comply. What are these? Let's understand. First, except as provided in paragraph number A of this section, the managerial person is not receiving remuneration from any other company. So simple, they are saying this was my paragraph A, you are excluding this and you are stating in paragraph B and C, the managerial person should be receiving remuneration from only and only one company, that is these companies. Right? So why they have stated except in paragraph A? Because in paragraph A, they are themselves stating that yes, the excess part is being paid by some other company, right? Let's see other two conditions. The auditor of the company or CS of the company, or if there is no CS, any other CS in practice, they should certify two particular things. So basically two certificates need to be obtained. First certificate, all the secured creditors and term lender. Term lender means who are providing term loans for 8 years, 10 years, 5 years, whatever the term is, have stated in writing that they have no objection for appointment of managerial person as well as remuneration. So 2-3 very important points to be noted. First of all, we are asking this certificate only and only with respect to two types of creditors, that is secured creditors and term lenders. Unsecured creditors are not covered here. And what are they stating? They are stating in writing, not oral submission, in writing two things. One, we do not object with respect to the appointment of such person, and we do not object with respect to remuneration of such person. Which person? Managerial person or other director. Managerial person or other director. So everywhere we have to study MP or other director. Right? Here they have not given, but obviously we can assume that it is stated. And this certificate shall be filed along with MR1. MR1, what is MR1? Sir, it is filed with ROC within 60 days of appointment that we studied at the start of the chapter. Secondly, these people have to certify that there is no default on payment with respect to any creditor. So here unsecured creditor will also be covered, and all the dues to the deposit holders are being settled on time. Deposits, you have a fair idea of what it is. We studied in section number 73 and 76. It is basically covered in C enter, but again, you must be having a fair idea of it, that deposit holders should be settled on time. So because if there is any default with respect to these creditors or deposit holder, then again, you cannot pay in these special circumstances, right? Because the certificate won't be obtained. They have given the meaning of other director that I have already explained, that it means non-executive director or an independent director. Coming to section number 4, certain perquisites not included in the managerial remuneration ceiling of section number 2 and section number 3. So whatever the above section 2 and section number 3 that we studied, section 1 was handing over the matter to 197. Section 2 and section 3, whatever the limits we studied, if there are following perquisites that we will talk about, then these perquisites will be given over and above the ceiling. So for example, my ceiling is 60 lakh. It is possible that I pay 60 lakh to that person and I give these perquisites as something extra. So that is the meaning of out of the remuneration ceiling, right? So let's understand, these three perquisites are for all the managerial persons. All means Indian plus expat. Expat means the persons who are from outside India. What are the three perquisites? This is basically paragraph number 1. Contribution to PF, superannuation or annuity fund to the extent singly or put together are not taxable in the Income Tax Act 1961. So if you are contributing to the Provident Fund, PF, annuity fund, then provided that you are complying with Income Tax Act and those are not taxable and as per the Income Tax Act, here also these perquisites are outside the ceiling. Next, point number B, gratuity payable at the rate which is maximum half a month salary for each completed year of service. Everywhere in India, this condition is complied. No one pays more than half a month salary, and in real life we actually calculate it on the basis of 15 by 26. right? So again, this gratuity is allowed. This is a perquisite, so this is over and above the ceiling. And encashment of leave, so leave encashment provided you are encashing this at the end of the tenure. So they may try to confuse you and they will give you in the question that this person has got leave encashment at the end of the year. So that particular leave encashment is not outside the ceiling and it will be considered as a part of remuneration, right? You have to focus on end of the tenure. Now, apart from these three, there are certain more, that is 3 more perquisites, but these are outside the remuneration ceiling only with respect to expat people. Expat means outside India people, including NRI. So if there is someone who is an Indian working in a company, then these 3 benefits and these 3 perquisites will still form a part of the remuneration. I hope this is clear. Now let's talk about paragraph number 2, 3 perquisites. Number 1, let's understand first perquisite, children's education allowance. So 2, 3 very important points to be noted. This particular perquisite is allowed. This is not exactly a perquisite but kind of an allowance, but still we are not talking about income tax particulars. We are talking about from the Companies Act point of view. So children education allowance is allowed only and only with respect to max 2 children. These 2 children can be studying in India or outside India, does not matter, and the limit is the perquisite or the limit is 12,000 per month per child, or actual expenses, whichever is less. So if the actual expense is, let's say 7,000 only, then we will provide the benefit of 7,000 only. But if it is more than that, then if you are getting the the allowance with respect to it, then we will restrict the limit to the 12,000. Beyond that, if you are getting anything, that will form the part of the remuneration, and that has to be checked with respect to the ceiling. I hope this is clear. Now please note that children may be studying in India or outside India, and this is restricted to 2 children. If there are, let's say 3 children and the company is paying for 3, then with respect to the 1, you have to include the entire amount in the remuneration. B, holiday passage for children studying outside India or family which is staying abroad. So what is this holiday passage? Basically, the person, the main managerial person is working in India, and his family or his children are staying outside India, so they can come to in India and they can go back. So this particular perquisite is allowed once every year, provided that they are traveling by economy class. But if they are traveling by first class or business class, then that is restricted to once every 2 years. But why? Because the first class ticket is comparatively very expensive. We can say double the economy class. So again, instead of once every year, we are allowing once in 2 years, right? So in question, you have to focus on whether the persons, that is the children or family staying outside India, are they traveling by first class or economy class. Third, LTC leave travel concession. This is when the person is choosing to spend the time and spend the holiday in his home country rather than India. Right? So we are providing leave travel concession, that is the return passage for self and family if staying along with him, in accordance with the rules of the company, where it is proposed that the leave be spent in the home country instead of anywhere in India. If he is roaming in India, then leave travel concession won't be applied. If he goes outside India, his home country, and he comes back, LTC is allowed. It is a perquisite. It will not form part of the remuneration ceiling. I hope you are able to understand that what is the meaning of being a part of the ceiling or not. I'm again explaining very shortly that if the remuneration ceiling is, let's say 84 lakhs, and if the person is being paid 84 lakhs, and apart from that these 3 perquisites are given, so this is allowed because it is over and above the remuneration ceiling, right? If not, then it will be considered as a part of it and the limit will be breached, so SR will be required. I hope this is clear. Coming to next. Sir, what is the meaning of effective capital? In item number A, the table that we studied, all the limits are linked as per what is my effective capital. So how to calculate the effective capital? So effective capital is a very clear mathematical calculation. You have to include paid up share capital, equity as well as preference. You don't have to include share application money or advance against shares because the shares have not been allotted in both of these cases. You have to include shares or security premium. That is pretty much clear. That is self-explanatory. You have to include reserves and surplus, but you have to exclude revaluation reserve. Why? Because it is a bookish adjustment. You just revalue the assets in your books, so that is not actually any kind of money received, so that is not my capital. See, capital means which is invested in the business of the company, right? So you will also include long-term loans and deposits. If something is received as a long-term money, so that money is invested in the capital of the company, hence it is a part of effective capital. What is the meaning of long term? Which is repayable after 1 year, beyond 1 year. If it is under 1 year, that is not long term, that will not form part of the effective capital. Again, obviously you have to exclude working capital loan, overdrafts. What about interest due on loans? Interest due on loans are never included as a part of effective capital unless funded. So whenever it is given as an interest on loan, see whether it is funded or unfunded. Funded means kind of it is converted as a loan only. So loan for interest. So it will take form of a loan and it will be included as a part of effective capital, right? So you have to focus on whether funded is given or not in the question. If not, you take an assumption, you provide a note to it. Bank guarantee, again, it is not a form part, it does not form part of the effective capital because bank guarantee is kind of a contingent thing. And other short-term arrangement, reduction means you have to minus this from the additions that you have done. What all things need to be reduced? Investments. So why investments are being reduced? Because that money has gone outside the company. So even if they are purchasing shares of some other company, that has gone out means it is not invested in the capital of the company. And you don't have to reduce investment if it is a case of investment company. Why? If it is a case of investment company, its principal business would be to make investments. So it is going to invest on a daily basis. If we start reducing the investment on a daily basis, the effective capital will be very low. Right? So you have to reduce this except in case of an investment company whose principal business is acquisition of stock, shares, debentures and other securities. Accumulated losses, you have to reduce it. Why? Because basically we set it off with the general reserves and profit and loss account. Preliminary expenses not written off. Again, you have to write off. Basically you're writing off, you are deducting it. Right? Now comes some very important question that, sir, we have a fair understanding of how to calculate effective capital. Now when to calculate effective capital? What is the date on which we will take these calculations under measure? In all the cases, you have to take the last date of the preceding financial year. So if the appointment is, let's say, in 20th September 23, then the effective capital will be calculated as on 31st March 23. But if the appointment is in the year of incorporation, then the effective capital has to be calculated on the date of appointment of that particular managerial person. I hope this is clear. Next. Sir, what do you mean by family? A lot of times in the prerequisites we stated family. What do you mean by family? Family means spouse. So husband or wife, and dependent children and dependent parents. So if independent, if the parent or child is independent, won't be included in the definition of family. Explanation 4, you can just have a brief reading that NRC, while approving anything, shall take into consideration some basic factors as to the financial position of the company, the qualifications of that person and all those points. This is not very important. Sir, negative effective capital means less than 0. It is possible that effective capital is minus 2 CR. Sir, how can effective capital be negative? When you reduce these things, let's say investments and everything, it is possible that the figure is negative. And in case of negative capital, the first slab will apply. Right? Depending upon whom we are paying. Okay, next. Remuneration includes reimbursement of direct taxes to the managerial person. Very, very important. Why? Because direct taxes are personal expense. So if you are reimbursing any personal expense, that is a part of remuneration. Section number 5, remuneration payable to a managerial person in two companies. Let's say I am working as a managing director in A Limited as well as B Limited. Am I allowed to draw remuneration from both the companies? Answer is yes. But sir, we are able to remember something that you told about, that he should not be drawing remuneration in two or more than one company. That was only with respect to special circumstances. Here we are talking in general, right? So am I allowed to draw remuneration from two companies? Answer is yes. Only condition to be checked upon is that the total of remuneration drawn should be under the permissible limit of higher of any two. Let's say here the limit, A Limited, the limit is coming to be 60 lakhs. The B Limited limit is coming to be, let's say, 84 lakhs. Then my total of remuneration should be below 84 lakhs. I hope this is clear. This is very simple. Please don't overcomplicate this. Next, part number 3, schedule number 5, procedural requirements for appointment and remuneration as per schedule number 5. This is a very procedural point, that appointment and remuneration shall be subject to approval of resolution by shareholders in general meeting. This we have already studied in subsection 4. B, the auditor or the CS of the company, or if not CS in practice, will again provide a certificate that the requirement of this schedule has been complied with, that is schedule number 5, and such certificate shall be filed with ROC with form number 1. Above also in one place we have talked about this kind of a certificate, but that was only and only with respect to professional capacity related conditions, right? Here we talked about it. This is with respect to each and every case. Part number 4 is not very relevant, that CG may provide some exemption. If it provides the exemption, we will comply the requirements and avail the exemption, right? Now let's talk about section number 197. Okay, let's proceed with section number 197 now. Section 197 talks about overall maximum managerial remuneration and managerial remuneration in case of absence or inadequacy of profits. Now you may have a query that, sir, with respect to absence or inadequacy of profits, this topic has already been dealt with in schedule number 5. So yes, we are not going to study anything extra. Here also it will be stated that the matter will be handed over to schedule number 5. See, when there is no profit or inadequate profit, we talk about schedule number 5, but when there are adequate profits, then we talk about section number 197. Okay, let's start 197 subsection 1. Total maximum managerial remuneration payable by a public company for any financial year. So first of all, the point to be noted is that section number 197 applies to public companies, and when I say public companies, it includes private companies whose holding company is a public company. This is linked to the proviso to section 2 clause 71. I hope you are able to recollect. 2 clause 71 deals with the definition of a public company. So this section applies only and only to public company, and this exemption to a private company does not come from any exemption notification. It comes from the applicability of the section itself. So even if it is stated that a private company is not in compliance of section 92 or 137, still this section won't have any applicability. As an extension point, schedule 5 is also applicable only to public companies, right? It is not applicable to private companies. Let's start. So what is the total maximum managerial remuneration payable by a public company for any financial year? And when I say total maximum remuneration, it includes to every managerial person, every director, all persons included. That is 11% of the net profits. And what are net profits? That we are going to learn to calculate under section 198, right? So to all the directors, maximum means to all the directors and including manager, because he is a managerial person. So that is 11% of the net profits of the company for that financial year. And when you calculate net profits, you don't have to deduct the director's remuneration. Why? Because that is the figure that we are calculating by calculating the net profit. So like if they this would have been our class 10th or 12th sum, we would have taken it as X and we would have gone for back calculation. That is not needed at this level. Okay, now if you want to exceed this percentage, then you will need an ordinary resolution by the members of the company, right? So members in the general meeting may authorize the excess payment subject to schedule number 5. This is not linked right now. You just have to remember OR is required, not SR. Section 197 is not applicable to a government company, but in this case, government company's case, you have to learn 92 137 is required. Also not applicable to a private company, but the point of non-requirement of compliance of 92 137 I have already covered. Now let's understand some specific percentages limit. The above 11% was overall maximum managerial remuneration, but now we will study about individual limits, that is with respect to managerial person and other director. Other director means who are not MD, whole-time director, or some other person who is not a manager. I hope this is clear. Let's start. Now what are the specific limits? First, we will talk about the managerial person. So in managerial person, 3 people are included: managing director, whole-time director, and manager. Now their remuneration percentage depends on how many of them are appointed. If there is only one of them, we can pay him up to 5% of the net profits. And if there is more than one of them, total we can pay 10% of the net profits. But there is a hidden interpretation point that you need to take care of. Very, very important, the point which I am going to say that if there are, let's say, 2 people, MD and whole-time director appointed, can we pay 7 plus 3? Now you may think that yes sir, it is possible because the total is 10. No, you cannot pay 7 plus 3, because still while calculating the total and while checking the total limit, this individual limit also continues to apply to any one person. You can pay maximum 5%. So this split can be 5 plus 5 but not 7 plus 3. I hope I'm making this point clear. Apart from this, I've taken an example that will also clarify certain things. Now, coming to other directors. Now, other directors' remuneration depends not on how many of them are appointed, but if any managerial person is appointed or not. If there is a managerial person, that is MD, whole-time director or manager, so we will say that, see, managerial person is appointed, we have to pay a lot of salary remuneration to them. So for you, we don't have that much limit, so we can pay you up to 1% of the net profit. And if there is no managerial person, then okay, we will increase the amount by 2%. So we can pay up to 3% of the net profits. I hope this is clear. And if these limits are to be excluded, then you require a special resolution. So 11% exceeding requires ordinary resolution. Individual specific limits exceeding requires a special resolution. There is one modification with respect to Nidhi company that you can do on your own. Now I want to cover one example. This example will clarify everything with respect to these 4 limits, and it's a very important example. What I would try to suggest is that Leaving this column aside, I am trying to remove that on the screen. You can just mark this data in your register if you have 5 minutes, and you can try to calculate the percentages on yourself, and you can then check your answers when I discuss, right? You can pause the video here and you can try to solve it. Let's start. Now, let's say there is one managing director, one whole-time director in the company, and there is no other director. So what is the maximum managerial remuneration I can pay? Sir, 10%. What is the maximum remuneration I can pay? 10%. And the bonus point which I already discussed, that maximum to MD or whole-time director 5%. So it can be 5 plus 5. It cannot be 7 plus 3. It cannot be 8 plus 2. Why? Because individual 5% limit still exists when we talk about the total limit of 10%. I hope this is clear. Let's move ahead. Can I take this case, one MD, no whole-time director and one manager? No, because MD and whole-time director are not possible. The appointment is prohibited under section 196. Now let's say there is one whole-time director and one manager and there is no other director. So answer will remain same because there are two managerial persons. Let's take an example where there is one MD, one whole-time director, no manager and one other director. So with respect to managerial person, we will pay 10%, and with respect to other director, we will pay 1%. Why? Because there is one managerial person appointed. I am repeating this point again, that when you talk about the percentages to managerial person, it depends on how many of them are appointed. But when we talk about remuneration percentages, the percentages with respect to other directors, it depends on whether there is any managerial person appointed or not. There is a difference in both. Have this mindset clear before you apply the limits. So this will be my 10 plus 1. Coming to next, let's say we have one MD, we have one whole-time director, and we are 2 or 3 other director. Answer will remain same. Why? Because this number is irrelevant to decide the percentages. Since there is at least one managerial person, we can pay maximum 1 to other director and 10 to managerial person. So total will remain same, 11%. If there is no managerial person, then regardless of we have 1, 2, 3, 4 or whatever it is, the total remuneration possible percentage is 3% of net profit. If we have one MD and we have no whole-time director and manager, but we have 1, 2, 3 or other director, it does not matter. Here we can pay 1% and here we can pay 5%. So 5 plus 1, 6%. Next, if we have one MD and we have no other person, here max to max 5% is possible because there is one managerial person. Now bonus point to be learned, not learned, rather I can say understood from the exam point of view, is that if your answer is anything apart from these percentages that have been stated on the screen, it means your answer is wrong because there is no other case possible. So here the answers will be either 3%, 5%, 6%, 10% or 11%. If your answer comes to be 12% or 13%, it is wrong. Why? Because if you see in all the cases, in none of the cases, my answer exceeded 11 because 11 is the statutory limit that we studied. So that has also been checked indirectly that your answer should not be wrong. So if your answer is coming out to be, let's say by mistake, you do 10 plus 3, 13%. Here there should be kind of a ring in your mind that no sir, my answer is wrong because total maximum is 11%. So these are the possible answers that you can get in your exam, and obviously you will apply these percentages on the net profit. I hope this is clear. So this was a very good example which will clarify a lot of things. Coming to next, the percentages given above are exclusive of the sitting fees. So sitting fees that I will cover in next 2 to 3 minutes. These are apart from the the remuneration percentages. Same applies to schedule number 5 as well. In schedule number 5 also, every limit, every remuneration amount is exclusive of the sitting fees that is possible, that we will study in due course. Now, third proviso, it says that if you want to pay the excess of these amounts, first condition was that you require a special resolution, but before that check that if there is any default with respect to bank, PFI, non-convertible debenture holder or any other secured creditor. These are the same 4 people types of person that we covered above as well, and these are going to be repeated ahead as well. So I am recommending you to learn these list of 4 very properly. Unsecured creditor are not covered here. Okay, so these four people, if there is any default, you have to take their approval first before you obtain the approval in the general meeting of special resolution. Next, C, subsection 3 handed over the matter to schedule number 5. Notwithstanding above subsections, if no profits or inadequate profit, pay as per schedule number 5 that we have already covered. 197 subsection 4, modes of determination of remuneration, that is how to determine that how much amount is to be paid. It will be determined either by way of articles or by OR or by SR in general meeting if required by articles. So in short, we are saying that board of directors have no power to determine the remuneration because obviously they will determine their own remuneration to be very high, keeping aside the requirements and needs of the company. Next, remuneration, very important. Remuneration payable to a director determined aforesaid shall be inclusive of the remuneration payable to him for services rendered by him in any other capacity. For example, a managing director is working in some other capacity for which that other capacity can be anything, for which we are paying him, let's say, rupees 1 lakh. So that 1 lakh will also be calculated and it will be considered in his remuneration when you check whether this percentage limit are complied or not. But you may have a query that, sir, what if he is doing some professional job? Let's say he is doing some valuation service as a chartered accountant, the MD. So that valuation service that he is doing, for which we will be paying him, let's say, 2 lakh rupees, that should not be counted in the remuneration. That seems very, very wrong. So yes, there is a proviso to 197 subsection 4, and it comes and says that the remuneration for any work in other capacity shall not be included in his remuneration, provided two conditions are satisfied. First, the services are of professional nature, for example, CA, CS, valuation, anything. And second, in the opinion of NRC, if 178 applies, or if it does not apply, then in the opinion of the board of directors, the board possesses, the director possesses the requisite qualification for practice of the profession. So if he is doing valuation, he must have passed the valuation exam, right? So he should not be practicing profession without any qualification. So you have to take the opinion of the respective competent authority depending 178 applies or not. And please mark this point, and is written, so both conditions are to be complied. If these conditions are complied, then that 2 lakh rupees payment shall not be included in the remuneration. That will be over and above to his remuneration. I hope this is clear. Sitting fees. A director can be paid sitting fees for attending the meetings of the board of directors or committee. Committee means, let's say, NRC, audit committee, stakeholder relationship committee. What is the maximum amount that will be paid? Maximum is rupees 1 lakh. See, the amount of sitting fees is stated in the articles of the company, but that amount can be max to max rupees 1 lakh per meeting. Point to be noted, a woman director and independent director cannot be discriminated with, meaning which you cannot pay these two types of directors anything less than other directors, but you can pay equal or more than them. Equal or more than them. So less is not possible. I hope this is clear. Subsection 7 was omitted. Subsection 8 simply says that net profit shall be calculated as per 198, that we will cover in the last part of the chapter. 197 subsection 6, mode of payment. Sir, we just studied the mode of payment. No, that was basically with respect to the determination of the amount of remuneration. Here we are talking about the mode of payment. So the mode of payment can be monthly. You can pay him a monthly amount. It can be yearly, like let's say a net profit is calculated, you apply the percentage and you pay him at the year end, or it can be partly both. So combination of both, that is okay, not a very big deal. Subsection 9, what if any excess remuneration is given directly or indirectly, or it is given without the requisite approval? So the point is that a managerial person or other director has received some amount without due approval. So can he keep that amount? Should we forget that the excess has been paid? Answer is no. That needs to be recovered back by the company within 2 years or any lesser time period as decided by the company. I hope this is clear. Is it possible that the company waves off and says that no, we don't want that excess payment, let's forget it, let's forget that amount and let that person keep the amount? Answer is yes, but for that you require a special resolution to be passed within 2 years of this excess payment date. Excess payment means the date basically on which that excess payment became refundable, right? So for that you require a special resolution, and before special resolution, again that default point check, same those 4 people, if there is any default with respect to their dues, you have to take their approval first before you go for any special resolution of the members. I hope this is clear. If the company does not have profits or inadequate profit, and if you are still increasing the remuneration, still does not matter, we have to check schedule number 5. This is not a new point. Next, certain disclosures are required by listed company in its board report. Point to be noted, only and only in case of a listed company, not unlisted company. Now there are basically 3 things. First is a ratio, and then there are 2 things with respect to, or I can say 4 things. First this, and 3 things with respect to rule number 5, but 2 are only important. The rule number 5.1 and 5.3 are not very important. You can read and leave. Main are these 2 points. First, we have to mention this ratio, that is remuneration of each director upon median of employees remuneration. So this will be my 1 figure calculated, and for every director you have to disclose this ratio. If this ratio is very high, that means the employee's median salary is low and director salary is very high, right? So this is kind of a disclosure by listed company, and it is a good corporate governance practice. Second, you have to disclose the prescribed details as per rule 5 sub rule 2, in which you have to give a statement of your top 10 earning employees in the company in terms of the remuneration drawn. Apart from these top 10 names, we also need name of every employee who falls under any of these three criteria. Number one, if he was employed throughout the financial year and his yearly remuneration was minimum rupees 1 crore 2 lakhs. So Companies Act assumes that 1 crore 2 lakh for yearly remuneration is very big, so the adequate disclosure is required and the members need to know who this person is. Second, if he is not employed throughout the year, but for part of the year, but still his monthly remuneration comes out to be 8,50,000 per month, and this actually translates to yearly 1 crore 2 lakh only. So for example, if a person is working for 6 months and if he is earning 8,50,000 per month, if we see per month on a per month basis, then also you have to disclose that. So basically first and second are same, it just depends on whether he is employed throughout the year or not. Third, if that person employed throughout the financial year or he was not employed for the throughout the financial year and his remuneration limit did not cross this, but the remuneration was in excess of that drawn by MD, whole-time director or manager. So Companies Act now says that okay, it is possible that maybe these limits were not breached, you didn't earn that much, but your remuneration was more than the managerial persons, any one of the managerial person, and you hold good amount of equity. What is the good amount of equity? That is, you hold minimum 2% equity in the company. I'm focusing on the word equity, not preference or debenture or anything else, and this holding can be by himself or along with his spouse and dependent children. So again, if these two conditions, these two are and, these two conditions are to be read as and basis. So if these two conditions are satisfied, then also your disclosure will be required. Rule 5.1 is very general, that percentage increase in median remuneration, how many employees, permanent employees, designation, remuneration, qualification of your employees. This is given as a part of every annual report if you see. Okay, next, section 197 subsection 13. Now it is possible that sometimes for big people in a company, and now what do I mean when I say big people? Managing director, whole-time director, manager, this means basically the managerial person, and CEO, CFO or CS. For these people, it is possible that a policy is taken with respect to some indemnification that can be enforced against them. So basically there was some offense in which they were guilty or may not be guilty, but they had to pay some amount, they had to indemnify some amount to the company. Now a premium, a policy, a kind of an insurance policy is taken against this indemnification, whereby if these kind of people, these top rated people have to pay any amount, they will get that amount from the basically the insurance company. So just like normal how the insurance works. Now the question comes is, sir, what about that premium? That premium that is paid for these people, is it a part of their remuneration? So the answer to this depends on whether they are guilty or not with respect to that indemnification. If they are not guilty but still they had to pay something, the premium is not included in the part of their remuneration. But if they are guilty, so means they are basically wrong. So in that case, we will try to punish them, and hence the premium which was paid on that policy will be included in their remuneration. I hope this is clear. So the entire issue boils down to one question: was the premium, was that particular person guilty or not? On the basis of which we will decide whether the premium is a part of a remuneration or not. Let's move ahead. Subsection 14 is a very typical subsection in which basically the situation is that MD or whole-time director is receiving commission from a company. Now the question comes, can he receive any remuneration or commission from that company's holding or subsidiary? Answer is yes, provided in the company's board report the disclosure is made. In the company's report the board disclosure is made. Board report means the section number 134 that we do. So the board report discloses it that this person is our MD, whole-time director, also receiving remuneration or commission from holding or subsidiary. So this is kind of, we can say, very typical situation that they have covered, and it may come as a direct question. Auditor has to disclose in his auditor report under section 143 basically two things. First, whether the remuneration paid by the company to its directors is as per section 197 or not, and whether there was any breach, that is if any excess was paid or not. So these two statements are very standard statements that need to be given. So this was basically my section number 197. Now 198 we will cover at the end. Let's cover section number 199 first, recovery of remuneration in certain cases. You can read this section. I will give you the complete hint and the complete foundation of what this section says. See, the remuneration limits depend upon the net profits of the company. Agreed? Yes, sir. So let's say a company had a net profit of rupees 1 crore, on the basis of which we applied the percentages of 1, 3, 5, 10, and we paid our MD, managing director, CEO, even CEO for that, in fact. So whatever amount was that we have paid to that particular person. Now let's say tomorrow the financial statements were altered. They were restated. Why? Maybe there was some fraud. If you don't remember, there is one section 131, 130 and 131 that we studied in CA Inter. So that is basically the link to this particular section, and the financial statements were restated due to fraud. And let's say my net profit was, let's say now 85 lakhs, from 1 crore to 85 lakh. Now tell me 5% of 1 crore and 5% of 85 lakh, obviously there will be some difference. So that difference now of 15 lakhs into 8%, that is my excess amount paid to some person. Whatever he is, MD, whole-time director, CEO, whatever amount was paid, it was paid in excess amount. Why? Because earlier we paid those amounts linked to rupees 1 crore net profit, but now my actual net profit is rupees 85 lakh because those financial statements were faulty. Now, shouldn't we recover that 15 lakh into whatever the percentage is from that particular person to whom we paid? Answer is yes. So this section 199 says that we have to recover that remuneration in certain cases. What is this certain cases? Where there is restatement of financial statement, right? From MD, whole-time director, manager, CEO, by whatever name called. So CEO, if the percentage is linked to net profit, otherwise not, otherwise there will be no, scope for CEO salary here. Here it will be only, the coverage will be under section 199 only and only if the remuneration is linked to net profit, because my net profit is changing. Next, section number 200, you can just read this. This is not very important. That company has to fix limit with regard to remuneration, giving consideration to certain factors, like for example, company's performance, financial and operating for last 3 years, relationship between remuneration performance, how they are performing, what is their work, what is our rating methodology, all these points. This is just for a read. I don't think they will ask you in this particular section in detail. You can leave out. Section number 201, forms of and procedure in relation to certain applications. Now, we had learned that in certain cases, the company may file an application to the central government by filing form MR2 in case of non-compliance of Schedule 5 Part number 1, the 4 conditions that we studied. Now, do you think that in real life, the members would like to know this information that, okay, our company is proceeding for filing MR2 to the central government? Wouldn't it appreciate kind of a heads up that, listen, the company and the board of directors are giving heads up to the members that, listen members, we are going to file an application to the central government by filing form number MR2? Answer is yes. So that is why section number 201 came, and here the members need to be notified. Now let's see the process in brief. Every application to the CG in form MR2, this is already known. Certain compliances before you file an application. Before filing the above application, that is MR2, a general notice to be issued by or on behalf of the company to the members indicating the nature of application proposed to be made, that is of MR2. This notice shall be published at least once in newspaper of the principal language of the district of registered office and which is circulated in that district, and at least once in English newspaper, English language circulating in that district which of registered office. And when you file the MR2 application to the central government, you have to attach copies of the notices along with the certificate by the company with respect to due publication of the notice, and then you have to file the complete set of application to the central government stating that, yes sir, we have complied with section number 201. I hope this is clear. Let's proceed to section 202. Compensation for loss of office of managerial person. This section 202 is kind of linked with section 191 as well, 191 that we study in chapter number 2. But 202 is, please understand, the company is paying something to its own managerial person. The most important and most common silly mistake with section 202 is that sometimes students get kind of excited because the figures are there and they quickly, they apply section 202, but they forget to first identify whether the person is a managerial person or not. So in section 202, you cannot pay to any normal director. It has to be managing director, manager, or whole-time director. Let's understand what are the payments. First point, you have to pay only to the managerial person. Subsection 2. Now, first of all, why are we paying? See, there are some situations due to which the person is losing his job. As simple as that. So we are going to pay him something. But there are 6 to 7 situations in which we are not going to pay him anything. Let's start. First, when the director resigns, no payment in these sections are these particular cases. When the director resigns from his office as a result of reconstruction of the company or amalgamation with any other body corporate or bodies corporate, but he resigns, our company amalgamated, our company reconstructed, we were going to pay him, but he was appointed as the managing director, whole-time director, manager, or any other officer of the reconstructed company or body corporate resulting from amalgamation. So that person has got a new job. Please understand, any other officer is wide coverage, that any kind of job. So he got a job in the new company, newly reconstructed or amalgamated company. So why will we pay him again? Actually, there is no loss. He got a new job. Next, where the director resigns from his office otherwise than on reconstruction or amalgamation. So our company did nothing. Our company is still continuing its business operations. The person is resigning by himself under section 168, chapter number 1. I have already uploaded in English. So now he cannot demand any remuneration because it's his own willing decision. Right? It's his own voluntary decision to resign. So he can resign. We are not going to pay him anything. Where the office is vacated due to section 167 subsection 1. Now 167 subsection 1 clauses have attracted. We have not done anything. Due to statutory compliance, we have to leave the office. We will not pay you anything. Where the company is being wound up, whether by an order of tribunal or voluntary, you must be knowing that voluntary does not happen under Companies Act now. This is wrong, but Act has not been amended. So I have given it as it is. Provided the winding up was due to the negligence or default of the director. Listen, director, due to your negligence or default, the company is being wound up by the tribunal and now you want payment for leaving the office. Get out. No payment to you. Okay. Where the director has been guilty of fraud or breach of trust in relation to or gross negligence or gross mismanagement or the conduct of the affairs. So this is pretty much clear that he is involved in wrongful acts. So it can be anything: negligence, mismanagement, and mismanagement of what? Of the affairs of the company or company subsidiary or company's holding. So company subsidiary and company's holding. Where the director has instigated or taken part directly or indirectly in the termination of his employment. Instigated means kinds of provoked, and here also we can say that you are voluntarily doing this. You are doing this voluntarily, that you want your job to be terminated. So when you are taking part in that particular proceeding, you are instigating it yourself. Why should we pay you now? Okay, get out. There is one more case that is going to come, but before that, let's cover that case first. That such payment is prohibited on also in one of the specific cases, that apart from the above 6 cases, the commencement of winding up has happened. So what happened? Winding up commencement is happening. When did it happen? It happened before or at any time within 12 months after the date on which he ceased to hold office. He means managerial person. So before he ceased or after ceasing within 12 months, winding up has happened. But what is the main reason that we are not paying him? Winding up is okay, but we could have paid him, but we cannot pay him. Why? Because of insufficient funds. Our assets are not sufficient enough to repay the shareholders of the share capital, including the premium, if any, contributed by them. So I do not agree with this part, premium contributed by them, because while repaying, we will pay only the share capital. But still, you have to learn for theory point of view that assets are insufficient to repay the shareholders the amount of share capital that they own, along with the premium, if any, contributed by them. Now, because of this reason of insufficiency of funds, now you cannot be paid anything. The company will not pay you anything. Now, these all 7 cases were when the payment is not allowed. In balance cases, it is allowed. Now, let's try to understand what is the amount calculation, because it seems that sometimes there is issue in this particular question as well. But please understand, it is very, very easy. You need two things. One, you need a figure. You have to get a yearly figure, and second, you need certain number of years you will multiply, and that will get you the compensation amount. Let's start. How much maximum can be paid? Amount for the year. So you have to calculate yearly amount. What is that yearly amount? You will calculate average remuneration of last 3 years. So let's say my last 3 years remuneration was 6 lakh. So 6 plus 6 plus 6 divided by 3, that is my remuneration for year, and you have to multiply this by number of years. What is this number of years you will multiply with? The number of years left of his job, or 3 years, whichever is less. So if the number of years left out of his contract or job is, let's say, 5, we cannot pay for 5 years, it will be too big for the company, we will pay for 3. And if let's say his contract was left of only 1 year, we will pay for 1 year. I hope this is clear. Now there comes a query that, sir, these 3 years that you have to take average of, these 3 years, which 3 years? Last 3 years means, last means from what? From the date he ceased to hold the office. So the question may try to confuse you. If let's say the managerial person ceased to hold office on 6th July 23. So from 5th July backward 3 years, we have to take the calculation. In one of the questions in ICI, they had given the yearly remuneration in which you have to take the days calculation. Why? Because you have to calculate from 5th backward. So for 5 days also you have to take that amount into consideration. You have to total it and you have to divide by 3. So please mark this point. Sometimes students may commit this mistake. They may take the last 3 preceding financial year. I am not saying last preceding 3 financial year. I am saying last 3 years. I'm not saying financial years. So 3 years immediately preceding the date on which he ceased to hold office. But if he was in appointment for last 1 year only, then you have to take 1 year's average. So 1 year's amount. If 2 years, then 2 years average, right? So if it is less than 3, you have to take whatever those years are and average it out. Next. Nothing in this section, subsection 4, shall be deemed to prohibit payment to MD, whole-time director, manager of any remuneration for services rendered by him to the company in any other capacity. If anything is rendered in any other capacity, we will not stop that payment. That will be paid. Here we are talking about payment as a managerial person. I hope this is clear. Now, you may think that, sir, with respect to these kind of points where there was fraud or breach of trust, someone may put an allegation while a person is leaving that this managing director was, let's say, involved in fraud, and we will try to stop the payment. No, mere allegations are not enough. If you say he was guilty of fraud and you are trying to stop the payment, you have to prove. So mere allegations are not enough. The fraud needs to be proved. Mere suspicions are not enough, right? Apart from that, now let's take one case. Let's say a managing director is leaving and there were some allegations of fraud but which were not proved. So company said, okay, till the fraud is proved and till the investigation takes place, I am paying you rupees 1 lakh, go and let's see how the investigation turns out. And after that, if the investigation proves that that particular managing director was in fact involved in a fraud, he is proved guilty and actually he was not supposed to be paid even a single rupee, but still the company had paid rupees 1 lakh at the start when he was removed. Can the company recover that amount back? Answer is no. There is an established case law, Bell versus Lever Bros, that you need to understand. Okay, Bell versus Lever Bros. Next, section number 203, appointment of KMP. Now please understand the prescribed companies that need to have whole-time KMP. Whole-time KMP means MD, CEO, manager. If these three are not there, then whole-time director. Point to be noted. Next, company secretary, and third, CFO. So 3 posts are to be covered. A question may come as a tricky question. I'm trying to cover the questions part also indirectly here. That if a person, let's say Mr. Sid, Mr. Sid is a CA plus CS. Can he work as CFO and CS, and can we appoint one person in 2 positions? Answer is no. There are 2 reasons behind when I say no. 2 reasons for answer no. First, and. The word and is used. So it proves the intention of law that they want CS and CFO to be a separate person. Second, if one person is acting in 2 positions, he cannot act at one position on whole time basis. Because when he is acting, let's say I am acting as CFO, I cannot act as CS. So when I am not acting as CS, it means I am not a whole time CS, right? So whole time word will lose its meaning if we allow one person to be appointed in 2 positions. I hope this is clear. Next, now with respect to the prescribed companies, rule number 8 and rule number 8A that we need to understand. Rule number 8. Following companies need to have a whole-time KMP. Every listed company and every other public company with paid up share capital of minimum 10 crore. Point to be noted, I am saying public company, not private company. So every listed and every public with minimum 10 crore rupees share capital. Next, rule number 8A. Now rule number 8A talks about certain companies which require a whole-time company secretary. Right? Here there is no need to state separately because whole-time KMP includes a whole-time CS. But these companies, that is every private company with a minimum paid up share capital of 10 crore, these require a whole-time company secretary. I hope this is clear. So these do not require CFO or any other whole-time director, managing director, anything of that sort, but they require a whole-time CS. Now, coming to next, first proviso. Prohibition on appointment of one person on certain post at the same time. So which are these posts? Let's try to understand. An individual shall not be appointed or reappointed as the chairperson of the company as per the articles of the company, as well as MD or CEO of the same company, because it is practically impossible that he is handling the position of chairperson also, MD or CEO also, because both are conflicting position. But unless means but if the articles of the company provide otherwise, that is they allow this appointment by same person, then it is allowed. We don't have any problem. Second, the company does not carry multiple business. See, this makes more sense when the company is carrying separate business, so each business can have a CEO and maybe a company can have a group chairman. But since the company does not have separate business, we can allow the same person can be we can allow the same person to be MD or CEO as well as the chairperson of the company, right? Now this above proviso shall not be applicable on certain companies. Now you have to learn this. There is nothing of understanding involved. I will just repeat the point. You have to learn it. Which companies it is not applicable? Every public company having paid up share capital of minimum 100 crore and turnover of minimum 1000 crore. I am saying and, not or. Both of these conditions are complied plus two more conditions. These companies are engaged in multiple business which have each business have one or more CEO. So every business has a CEO, and apart from that, now these companies can have one MD, and that same person can be the chairperson. Why did you not say CEO? Because already the condition here is that each and every business has a separate CEO. I hope this point is absolutely clear. Next, appointment of every whole-time KMP. So who will appoint the whole-time KMP? Will the members appoint? Answer is no. Board of directors will appoint by means of a board resolution at a board meeting. So by circulation it is not possible. Second, a person can be a whole-time KMP in how many companies at the same time? He can be a whole-time KMP in one company except in its subsidiary at the same time. So kind of we can say he is allowed in two, right? Now I have one question with you. I have one question that you have to answer. Suppose there is a holding limited and there is a subsidiary limited. Now my question is, if Mr. A is working as a whole-time KMP in subsidiary limited, can he be appointed as a whole-time KMP in holding limited? Now many of you might be tempted to say the answer as yes sir, is allowed, because we have studied it right now. Just a minute. Is it allowed? Answer is no. Why? Because the law clearly says, I'm repeating, please mark this point, very very important, that a person can be a whole-time KMP in one company except in its subsidiary at the same time. So he should be first working in the holding company, then he can be appointed in the subsidiary company. Vice versa is not true. So in current case I stated that he is working in subsidiary, now he wants to be appointed in the holding. Answer is no, it is not possible. I had asked one question, right? I hope you will not commit a mistake in that. Apart from that, okay sir, with respect to whole-time KMP we understood, but can that whole-time KMP work as a director in any company? Answer is yes, provided the board approves it. So with the permission of board. Now second proviso is a transitional provision, we can ignore it out. Third proviso, very very important, and it involves a lot of queries as well, so ensure that it is completely clarified. There is one situation in which we are allowing one person to be appointed as whole-time KMP in more than one company apart from this provision, right? So let's take an example of Mr. Smart. Who is Mr. Smart? He is Mr. Smart and he is working as a managing director or manager in max to max one company. He is working as a managing director or manager in one company. Now some other company finds this person suitable, so the other company wants to appoint Mr. Smart as managing director. He is working as MD or manager, the other company wants to appoint as managing director. Is it allowed? Answer is yes. Two conditions to be complied. Number one, unanimous board resolution. This is one of the cases where UBR is required. One other case is section 186 chapter number 2. So first, unanimous board resolution, that is the detailed language that such appointment or employment is made or approved by a resolution present at the meeting of the board with consent of all directors. This means unanimous board resolution only. You have to state the complete detailed language, and of which the meeting and of the resolution to be moved thereat specific notice has been given to all the directors then in India. So here you require an agenda. In general section 173 subsection 3, agenda is not required, but 3 cases it is required. This is one of the cases where you require a specific notice, that is agenda needs to be given to whom? All the directors in India, right? If there is any vacancy in any whole-time KMP, who will fill? Board will fill within 6 months of the vacancy. How? At a board meeting. So circulation is not allowed. Now there is one condition with respect to government company. Subsection 4A is added, and it basically says that entire section that we studied, section number 203, shall not apply to managing director, CEO or manager, and in their absence a whole-time director of the government company. So with respect to these appointments, in case of a government company, section number 203 is not applicable provided 92, 137 are complied with. This was my section number 203. Let's cover section number 204, secretarial audit for bigger companies. Who does a secretarial audit? A company secretary in practice. And what is the certificate in which he gives the secretarial audit report? Form number MR3. Okay, so applicability, every listed company needs to go for a secretarial audit. Apart from that, every prescribed company needs to go for secretarial audit. Prescribed means two cases. First, every company, point to be noted, private as well as public, having outstanding loan borrowing from banks or PFI in excess or equal to 100 crore. So loans to be seen only from banks or PFI. So private plus public, loans borrowing from bank PFI, minimum 100 crore. Second case, every public company, only public, having paid up share capital of minimum 50 crore or turnover of minimum 250 crore. This existed earlier as well. This was, we can say, 2 to 3 years back it was amended, right? So I hope this is clear. You have to just learn these limits. The certificate is given in form number MR3. All the secretarial standards need to be followed, and if there is any qualification or observation or other remark in the report of the secretarial audit, the board of directors have to give their clarification under 134 that we already study, but in CA Inter, that is your board report. Functions of the company secretary, he will ensure entire Companies Act is properly complied. Otherwise, this is not a very important section. You can do it later. Okay, you can just read it out or you can leave it from exam point of view. Now let's cover section number 198. Let's proceed with next section number 198, calculation of profits. Before diving into the provisions of this section, first of all, you have to cover this section. Don't leave it. Anything can be asked. It is possible that you know everything about section number 197 or schedule number 5 or whatever it is, but they are asking you to calculate net profit. That will be your first step required. So it is possible that these kind of sections and these kind of questions are also tested in the exam. Before diving into the provisions, one important point, always pay attention as to what figure they have given in the question. It is possible that they may give you the net profit figure in which the adjustments of the effect of the adjustment has already been given, or it is possible that they have not given. So ensure you are paying attention as to what exact figure they have stated in the question, right? So if, for example, the adjustments are yet to be given effect, then you give the normal effect. That is, if something you have to give the credit, you have to add, and if something you have to debit, you have to minus it. But if it is possible that the effect have already been given, then you have to give a negative effect. For example, something has already been added that is not supposed to be added, then you reduce it. So basically pay attention as to what net profit figure they are giving and whether the adjustments have already been given effect to or not. Let's start. So basically 4 sections we will discuss: what credits you have to give, what credits you do not have to give, what debits you have to give, what debits you do not have to give. So what credit and debit we are talking about with respect to the P&L account. So our focus is to calculate net profit of the company, on the basis of which we will decide the remuneration and the figures of payment. Let's start. First section, do not give credit in P&L for the following. First, profits by way of premium on issue of securities unless it's an investment company. Why? Because the business of the company is not issue of shares. It is a one-time profit. It is kind of a capital profit. That's why stated unless it is an investment company, because if it is an investment company, then issuing shares, it is a day-to-day job for the company, and in that case the credit and the profit is actually a income. Next, profit on sale of forfeited shares. That is the same reason as we discussed in first. Capital profit. Why? Because it is not the business of the company. Capital profit from sale of any undertaking, fixed asset or immovable property unless the company is wholly or partly, even partly it is allowed, in the business of buying or selling such assets or property. So unless the company's whole time or part-time business is selling of undertaking property, then the profit will be included, otherwise not. Now they have given one thing, one small adjustment in the bracket which often becomes a kind of an issue. So let's try to understand this from by way of an example. Let's have a brief reading, then we will study the example. In case of sale of fixed asset, not immovable, undertaking or anything else, only and only in case of fixed asset, if sale value is more than WDV, give credit for so much of the excess which is up to original cost minus WDV. So this may sound very, very complicated and tricky. It is not. Let's try to cover this by way of a simple example. Now let's take section 198 example with respect to fixed asset. Let's say the asset cost was rupees 100 and depreciation was 20. So my written down value is 80, 100 minus 20. Sale was at 120. Now tell me, what is my actual profit? Actual profit is 40. How come? 120 minus 80. So actual profit is 40. But is it my actual profit? See, this is the profit that you have learned till now. But out of 40, isn't the 20 actually my depreciation reversal? And my actual profit is sale above the asset cost, that is 120 minus 100 is equal to 20. So can we split the 40 figure into 20 is my depreciation reversal and 20 is my actual profit, which is the sale value above 100. So in this case, the Companies Act under section 198 will allow the credit in P&L for 20. That is basically my depreciation reversal. You don't have to use these words depreciation reversal that I am using, but yes, for an understanding purpose, this is my actual profit which the Companies Act says, 198 says that you cannot give credit unless you are in the business of selling and buying the properties or immovable property or fixed asset, right? So 20 is allowed. I hope this is clear. If this example is clear, don't try to read that again. You will be able to solve this in the exam. One question also came in that 100 question series I have covered. Next, changes in the carrying amount of assets or liability recognized in equity reserve and surplus in P&L on measurement of asset or liability at fair value. This is a bookish adjustment. That's why we are not taking it. Unrealized or notional gains or revaluation. Again, these are bookish adjustment. Actual realization has not yet happened. They are clarifying that give credit in of the following in your P&L account. Bounties and subsidies. Bounties are kind of a help from government only. From any government or public authority constituted or authorized in this behalf by any government. So constitution can be done by any government and you are receiving this kind of a subsidy. You have to give credit in P&L unless CG directs otherwise. So unless the question says that CG has said please do not give credit, then we will not give the credit. Otherwise you have to give it. Next. Do not deduct the following in your P&L account. So following expenses are not allowed in P&L account. Normal income tax or super tax. See, super tax is nothing that we study in Income Tax Act. You just have to learn for this purpose. If they may state super tax, you have to ensure you're not giving the credit or you're not debiting it, right? So normal income tax act, super tax, any other similar tax by the company under Income Tax Act, these are kind of considered as personal nature. Obviously in case of a company it is not personal, but yes, income tax not to be given. Voluntary compensation paid, that is due to not any legal liability. So there was no legal liability for the company to pay, but still company out of good faith, or we can say in good governance, or in good faith or bona fide manner, it paid some amount to someone. So that amount cannot be debited because there was no legal liability. Capital loss including loss on sale of undertaking, because the company is not in the business of sale and purchase of undertaking, but yes, we can deduct WDV minus scrap value. So if in this example, if this asset was sold for 60, then 20 can be deducted. Why? Because we are assuming that as a depreciation. It has not been stated, but the image and the reasoning behind is that we are assuming that as kind of a depreciation, so that is allowed to be debited. Okay. Changes in carrying amount of asset liability recognized in equity reserve surplus in P&L on measurement of asset liability at fair value. Again, this is a bookish adjustment. Following debits you have to give. So you have to deduct expenses, director remuneration, except when you calculate 197. Why? Because in 197 we are calculating net profit in order to calculate director's remuneration. So obviously when we are calculating the net profit for director remuneration, how will we deduct director remuneration? Because we don't have that figure yet. Okay. Next, bonus, commission, salary to employees who may be engaged on whole time or part time basis. These are my employee costs. Even if it is part time, it is allowed to be debited. Taxes on any excess or abnormal profit or imposed for special reason or special circumstances. So let's say for example in 1 year there was a COVID tax, right? So that is allowed to be debited, but income tax not allowed. All kinds of interest on debenture, mortgage, secured, unsecured loan advances. This is my business expenditure. Revenue expenses, capital nature expenses will not be deducted. Very well, revenue will be deducted. 181 charitable contribution is also allowed to be debited. In ordinary course of our Income Tax Act, generally we go for a donation as a deduction that we study in section number 80G, right? But here it is allowed as your debit in P&L. 123 allowed depreciation. This is nothing. Section 123 is a normal which states that you have to follow the depreciation as per the schedule 2, and depreciation is allowed. Unabsorbed losses you can debit. These are to be debited. Compensation arising from legal liability. Above we studied that if anything is paid on a voluntary basis, that is not allowed to be debited, but compensation from legal liability is allowed to be debited. And if you have taken any insurance policy with respect to any possible legal liability, then the premium for that policy is allowed to be debited. Bad debts written off or adjusted, it is also allowed. So bad debts is a normal business expenditure. And here we finish our chapter number 3. I sincerely hope that this was useful. The complete lecture was in English language, especially for you guys. So ensure that you're commenting whatever your review is, because see, these kind of authentic feedbacks are the basis on which other students choose to watch the lecture, right? So I hope this was useful, and yes, all the very best. Study well, take care, be safe, bye bye.